If you walk down the street and ask an average Australian what is the right response to a newborn baby who has survived their birth but is struggling, the average Australian would just say, duh, the obvious response is to look after that baby, do whatever it takes to either save that baby's life or to make that baby comfortable before they pass. But that is not the response of federal politicians who have looked at this issue and who have consigned these babies to a life of misery and torture. The issue we're talking about today is the biggest scandal in our country. It happens once a week. Newborn babies survive their abortion and are left to die in Australian hospitals. We blew the lid on the data and evidence yesterday. If you haven't seen that, check it out. But today, we're going to look at the politics of this issue and you're going to be appalled. And that's today on The Dr. Joe Show. So in this video, there's good news and bad news. I'll start with the good news. The good news is our parliaments are beginning to turn their mind to this issue because of the campaign that we are running and the raising of public awareness on this issue. Our parliaments, both federally and at a state level, are beginning to look at this issue. The bad news is the current crop of politicians just don't cut it. You're going to see today in this video a group of politicians just existing in the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, and especially in the Greens. But these politicians are the norm and they just lack basic humanity. And so that's what we're going to look at today, the fact that they are responding to this issue of babies who survive their abortion and then they're left to die. They just couldn't give a damn. It might be hard for a normal person to understand the callousness, and that's why in this video I'm going to forensically show you how they've responded to this issue. This began in this current parliament when Matt Canavan reopened the issue. George Christensen, a previous Nationals politician, had introduced bills on this issue in the past, and we've got to give George credit for pioneering on this issue. And Matt Canavan reintroduced it. He produced a bill that said that if a baby survives their abortion, they should be entitled to equal treatment under the law. They should be treated no differently to any other baby born in that hospital. He was joined by other senators, Alex Antic, Ralph Babette, Malcolm Roberts, as people who really wanted to see this happen. So that then led to a Senate inquiry in June 2023. And it was a very interesting inquiry, the first sort of thing of that nature that I'd participated in. I participated in inquiries a lot over the years as an academic in the area of migration research, but I'd never participated in an inquiry on the issue of abortion and on this issue of babies who survived their abortion. And so the way they structured it is the first part of the day, they heard from people who thought the Matt Canavan's bill should pass, that we should have birth equality for these babies. And then the second half of the evidence was all of the abortion industry bigwigs, all the people that are apologists for leaving babies to die after their abortion. And what was just mind-blowing to me is that Senator Marielle Smith, who was leading that inquiry, who I had always presumed was quite a reasonable person on this issue. In fact, in her maiden speech, she says, I have come into this place to save children, to represent children, to look after the most vulnerable children in our society who can't speak for themselves. And I thought, well, this is great. She's chairing this inquiry. Surely she's going to get behind this issue. And yet she is chairing this inquiry and writes a report. The committee writes a report where they basically just Pontius Pilate it. They wash their hands of the issue. And they say, yes, some people say this is an issue, but then there's other people that say it isn't an issue, so we're just not going to give any recommendation. They don't use any of the coroner's reports, so they don't refer to the data that I traversed yesterday. And I'd done that for them. I'd given them that data, those coroner's reports. None of that appears in the official inquiry report by this committee that Marielle Smith chaired. And in fact, what they say is that the current guidelines are sufficient. And remember at the time, in July 2023, when they're presenting this report, Queensland actually had in its termination of pregnancy guidelines that if a live birth occurs, do not give life-sustaining treatment. So there's an actual mandate in the guidelines that says just if that baby could survive, well, just don't do it. Just don't give them that care. And so, for Marielle Smith and her cohort who served on that committee to say that the current guidelines are sufficient, I mean, it's evil, it's barbaric. There's a whole litany of words we could use, but the reality is they did nothing. So that's what they did. They produced that report. And then I guess the next thing that for me happened was just my heart was broken. I guess I'd only been speaking out about abortion for a little while at that point, about 12 months. And I just assumed that as we really started to get official inquiries looking into this, that ordinary, reasonable people that serve in our parliaments would have their minds open and then agree to do something about it. I just assumed, I had faith in the process that would happen. I just thought the reason this is allowed in Canada is because nobody knows, but we've now got a federal government inquiry. We'll be able to fix this. Canavan's bill will pass. That is not what happened. And so I did a lot of soul searching and thinking about what to do. And Robbie Katter's people reached out to me. And at first, I didn't know Robbie from any other politician. And being in this game, I started to I guess, not have a lot of trust in these politicians. So when Robbie Katter's people reached out to me and said, Robbie's really concerned about this issue of babies in Queensland being let to die after their abortion, I just thought, well, is he doing this for political points, for, to try and win votes? I just don't have an interest in working with people whose heart is really not in this for the babies, but have some kind of ulterior motive. So I kind of put Robbie through the ringer. We did a Zoom call. In fact, we did a couple of Zoom calls, and I asked him a series of questions and really tested and probed. And ultimately, he passed all those tests actually with flying colours. And I can tell you 18 months on, I now know Robbie very well. And I think he's one of the best politicians we have in any state or federal parliament. We need more people like him in the parliament. He's got integrity and he just calls it. He's a straight shooter. And he's been through the ringer for that. The press has put him through the ringer. The Labor and the Libs have turned on him, but he's a good guy. And anyway, what Robbie and I decided to do was to introduce a bill into the Queensland Parliament that mirrored Matt's bill in the federal parliament. So it was a bill that would get introduced, and it would essentially say that if a baby survives their abortion in Queensland, they're entitled to equal treatment under the law. And that's not controversial. You and I can agree that that is just basic humanity. That's what a decent society does to babies. Again, I guess I had hoped that it would be a non-controversial issue, but I had seen how the abortion industry had responded to Matt Canavan's bill, and I'd seen how pro-abortion journalists like Terry Shepard had, covered up for this issue and just basically not reported on the data. When they reported on the borderline issue, they reported it as a myth, and they just used a lineup of people from Murray Stokes saying this never happens. And, so I guess I was starting to get a little bit wiser to the fact that there's something really sus going on. And Robbie's bill got introduced. It was very exciting to see that happen. A whole bunch of Queensland women turned up for the day that he introduced it, and we did a press conference in Parliament, which was amazing. And then there was an inquiry. Now, I talked about that inquiry yesterday. So Louise Adset gave her testimony about what had happened and blew the lid on this. She's a midwife for 14 years. She broke down in tears before the politician. She explained, this isn't just data and coroner's reports. This is actually real lived examples that are traumatizing for midwives and nurses who have to deliver these babies and then aren't given any workload allocation, and these babies aren't given any rights under the law. So these midwives, these babies aren't included in staff to patient ratios. So they're left with this newborn baby. They've got to care for the mother who's just had the abortion. Then they've got all of these other women, some of whom are pregnant, have given birth and want their babies. And these midwives are left to pick up the pieces, and it's deeply traumatizing. So Lou shared all of that in the testimony. And what happened was, when I was catching the plane back from Queensland, I'd been there that day. I'd heard Lou's testimony. I knew it was explosive. And so on the plane home, if you watch my YouTube videos, you'll know that I do a lot on the plane. I'm very productive in those hours. And when I was on the plane home, I clicked her video and I created a video for social media. So I put it up on Instagram when I landed. And so the minute I landed, I put it up. And it was a video that just, it hit a raw nerve over straight away. People were commenting, how could this be? How could this happen? What are we doing? I put it on X, Facebook, TikTok, all of my platforms. And, it was getting a lot of views. I think about 500,000 within sort of 8 hours, which for me was a good amount of reach, a really exciting amount of reach to see people seeing this testimony and having their eyes opened. But one of the people who commented on the video was Senator Ralph Babette, a senator from Victoria who wrote on the video on my Instagram page. He said, I'm going to bring an urgency motion into the Parliament tomorrow to deal with this. I was gobsmacked. First of all, I didn't know what an urgency motion was, which I felt a bit embarrassed about because I'm a professor of law. I should really know about the different types of things that you can do in Parliament. But no one had ever told me a way that we can move this issue forward is to introduce an urgency motion. I've now done my research, and what I know is that senators can bring 2 urgency motions a year. So they have to be pretty circumspect and picky about what they're going to do their urgency motion on. But Ralph Babette had been so moved by watching Lou's testimony and had been following my content for a while, which I think had also helped educate him on the data and facts. And so he felt pretty confident going in, and I spoke to his people. And the next day, he introduced an urgency motion into the federal parliament. And what it said was, this happens once every 7 days, that a baby survives their abortion and is left to die. And that is true. That's just based on Victoria and Queensland data. So if we used every state and territory, it would actually be higher than that, but we don't have that publicly available. So we know from just 2 states, it's 1 every week. So that was in the motion. And then he said, I call on this parliament to recognise the human rights of these babies and their rights to equal treatment under the law. So if that urgency motion had passed, it wouldn't have created a legislative right to birth equality. But what it would have done is sent a normative signal, a sign to everybody that the federal Senate wants this issue dealt with. And, again, this time around, I was just so optimistic because I thought we've heard Lou's testimony. We've heard the abortionist, Dr. Alicia Broom from Branscog, saying we do this as a matter of course. We deliberately induce these babies alive and then leave them to die. She didn't say the leave them to die part, but that's the bit that we know happens. And I thought, well, surely the senators are going to vote en masse for this. And what was shocking to me is that 34 senators, so a majority of the people that rocked up for the vote, because a lot of them were too cowardly to even rock up, people that were on our side who wouldn't have voted against the babies, they just didn't count their votes. They just hid in the bathroom. No joke, guys. They didn't turn up to the Senate floor to vote. And so there were 17 courageous MPs who said, we're going to stand for the human rights of these babies. And I say courageous, but can I just be clear? I actually don't think it takes a lot of courage really to do that. It just takes a sense of decency. Any normal person should do that. We often give these politicians a big round of applause for standing up for, pro-life issues. Well, in reality, that's just what any basic person should do. So I think it's good that they did it. But I also think that should be the norm. That should be the very baseline of what we expect of a politician, that they look after babies who survived their abortion and are currently being left to die. But then get this, 34 politicians voted against Senator Babette's motion. So there were Labor politicians, the Greens universally, and then 4 Liberal politicians. And I think that was the bit that really particularly shocked people, that it was, because you expect Labor and the Greens, particularly the left of the Labor Party, to be just so radically pro-abortion and so anti-human rights when it comes to babies, even though they talk a big human rights game, those left parties, about how progressive they are. You do expect them to just throw the human rights of these babies under the bus. And so that wasn't surprising. But there were 4 Liberals, Simon Birmingham, Jane Hume, Andrew Bragg, and Maria Kovacic. And Maria Kovacic actually gets up in Parliament and gives a speech about why she's not voting for the motion. Let's take a look at what she said.
The motion, as set out, is very black and white. The matters for which it deals with are not.
This short quote exposes everything that's wrong with the calibre of the current crop of federal politicians. Most of them are like this. The fact that she can say that it's not a black and white issue how you respond to a human baby who is left on a metal kidney dish, who's gasping for air, is whimpering and struggling to breathe. For Maria Kovacic, that's not a black and white issue what you do. In seeing that speech and in seeing this very reasonable motion get voted down in this way, I then whirred into action and launched a parliamentary petition against Maria Kovacic and the fact that she must resign. It quickly reached so many Australians and people just got behind. Even ordinary Liberals were calling me and saying, thank you so much for what you're doing. This is a toxic sickness in the party. Rita Panahai also jumped on Sky, really calling out the 4 Liberals for their disgusting decision to vote against the interests of these babies. Peter Credlin as well did a number of stories on this. John Anderson, the Deputy Prime Minister, former Deputy Prime Minister, he also spoke up about this. So we started to see opinion pieces and media articles, again, not in the mainstream press, not in the ABC or The Guardian, SBS 9 said, and none of them covered this, which tells you something about the cover art. But we did start to see people waking up to this issue. The backlash is coming thick and fast to Maria Kovacic, so she then doubles down on social media and releases this video the very next day.
Yesterday in the Senate, I spoke against an urgency motion that claimed to be about protecting babies. Don't be fooled. That had nothing to do with it. It was an absolute smokescreen and an attempted manipulation of the Senate. What this was about was around trying to take away women's rights about their own health care, and that is entirely unacceptable. Decisions about an individual's health, whether you're a man or a woman, should be between you and your doctor.
What an absolute joke. So she's saying that giving babies a right to care after they survived their abortion, it's already happened, somehow takes away women's right to abortion. So I've been racking my brains to try and think about how could she be making this claim that it's going to erode access or rights to abortion. And the only thing I can think of is that she and the abortion industry are just so furious that the word is getting out about these babies, these newborns who survived their abortion. Because once you realize that it's a baby who survives their abortion, you start to question abortion itself. And the abortion industry, people like Maria Kovacic, apologists for the abortion industry, they just don't want this word to get out because they've spent decades dehumanizing these babies and brainwashing society so that we don't even think about them, that we don't even turn their mind to them. And yet here now, because of this urgency motion, because of Louise Asset's testimony, we are starting to realize these are babies struggling to breathe. And, Kovacic can't handle it. But the good news is, it doesn't end there. This story doesn't end there. What happens in a few months' time is Larissa Waters from the Greens. And you wouldn't think a story that starts with the good news is and then leads on to Larissa Waters is going to have a happy ending. But it does, because this is what happens. So let me tell you what happens next. Larissa Waters gets up in the parliament in about late November, early December, and she says, I'm going to introduce a motion myself next week to say that the Born Alive bill of Matt Canavan's should be removed from the Senate because we shouldn't be looking at this issue. This isn't surprising from Larissa Waters, who's been pro-abortion throughout her career. She's sat on the board of Children by Choice, the most pro-abortion advocacy organisation in the country. And yet here she is, again, doing the typical thing that was, straight from the playbook of the abortion industry, the cover-up, the fact that, okay, well, we can't even have a bill before the Senate looking at this issue. We are now going to pass a motion that removes this bill altogether. Not only are we just going to disregard the plight of these babies, we're going to cover it up. We're just going to remove this bill so nobody knows about it, so we don't discuss it. So there's just no on the notice paper. Again, people like me and others word into action, and we asked you guys to call every MP in the Senate and to speak to them about the fact that they had to vote against Larissa Waters' motion. And you know what was amazing? Because I didn't have high hopes. I think I'd sort of learned my lesson after just being ridiculously optimistic throughout everything that had led up until this point. I just didn't really have hope, guys, that we were going to win this one. But the good news is we did. What happened took everybody by surprise in that it got defeated. And as I was watching the parliamentary debate live on this motion, what I noticed as the vote was taking place is that the 4 Liberals who betrayed us last time either weren't in the chamber or they were voting with us. They were voting for the babies. So let's take a look at the very moment when this happened. Were you counting them?
I was, but there's equal on both sides, roughly, so it doesn't really matter that much.
Lock the doors.
They're locking the doors. They're locking the doors.
Notice of motion number 677. Order, there being 28 ayes and 30 noes, the matter is resolved in the negative. Yes! There may be further...
So that, honestly, guys, was the happiest moment of my 2025 because that's the first victory we have had in decades. Now, it may not sound like much of a victory in that we just defeated something that Larissa Waters did, something monstrously evil that she was trying to do, and we managed to stop it. But you know what? It is a victory for us who care about the human rights of these babies, because we finally won a vote. And I know that's all the end game. The end game is that we introduce bills that protect these babies and those bills pass. And that's where we have to get to. But the reality is when that vote was happening, because of the campaign that we'd run against those 4 Liberals, Birmingham, Hume, Brad and Kovacic, they did not vote with Larissa Waters and the Greens and pro-abortion Labor. They actually either didn't turn up, so Kovacic didn't turn up, but Birmingham actually voted for the babies this time around. And so you can see the impact of our very strong response in calling them out when they did that disgusting deed in voting against Babette's urgency motion. We can see the impact of that when this time around they do the opposite. And we know they probably didn't want to do the opposite. They had to do it kicking and screaming, but I don't really care because the fact of the matter is we got the outcome we wanted in that there is still a Born Alive protection bill in the federal parliament. There's a petition that's going to flick up on screen. Sign that petition, share this video. Make sure that you are doing your bit to tell everybody you know about this issue, because this doesn't end unless we end it, and we have to end it because it's the most horrific thing in our country today. So thank you very much for staying with the video till the end. If you did, there was good news, there was bad news, but ultimately I had great hope that together we are raising awareness and we are going to have birth equality in the not too distant future.